Hey everyone, it's Andrew back with another video, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about nostalgia. So nostalgia for me really comes down to 2 decades in terms of film and TV, and that of course is the 80s, which in my opinion is the greatest decade ever, and the 90s, especially the early to mid 90s. So that's the time period that really brings a lot of nostalgia back to me, and this is a thread response to The Last Shoegazer, Nick. So hopefully you enjoy this video, and to everyone else, hopefully you enjoy this video and it brings some nostalgia back to you guys, because yeah, I absolutely love a little bit of nostalgia. So I could go on and on about this topic, and there's a lot more movies that I could be talking about, but I'll try and limit myself and go through these pretty quickly. So if there's any movies that you are not familiar that I'm about to show you within this video, I highly urge you to check them out because they're all absolutely amazing. So we'll start with the 80s stuff first. So gotta include BMX Bandits, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's a Aussie BMX movie. It's basically the Aussie equivalent or the Australian equivalent to the Goonies. So yeah, this one comes highly recommended. One of my favourite 80s movies of all time. Then we've got Daryl, which is an absolute classic. The Dog That Stopped the War is one that I don't really hear too many people mention. It's also known as The Great Snowball War. Really, really good French-Canadian movie about two groups of kids fighting over a snow castle, and they have snowball wars and stuff like that. It's really, really good. The Goonies, which I don't really need to mention. It's my favourite film of all time. Everyone knows it, I'm sure. Absolutely phenomenal. Stand By Me, another absolute classic. The greatest coming of age story ever in my opinion. The Never Ending Story, this is one that I can remember renting out a lot growing up. Explorers is another absolute classic from the 80s. Love this one a lot. Really, really hope this one gets a Blu-ray release at some point. Lucas, really, really good 80s film. It's kind of underrated, I think. I don't really hear too many people ever talk about this one, which is kind of surprising, especially considering the cast. It's got a very, very good cast. Corey Haim, Charlie Sheen, Kerry Green, and Winona Ryder. So yeah, great movie. Great high school 80s themed movie centered around football. E.T., which is one of the earliest memories I have of watching a movie actually. E.T. was one of the first movies I can remember watching as a kid. Absolutely love this. Basically every time this comes on TV I still watch it. Whenever we get the television over here in Australia, it's the only way that I can actually view the original film, so with the guns at the end instead of the walkie-talkies and stuff like that. But yeah, this still brings me to tears even to this day, no matter how many times I watch it. I still get emotional over the ending. The Wizard with Fred Savage. This is an absolutely massive nostalgic hit for me, especially if you grew up playing video games like Nintendo. This one comes highly recommended. License to Drive, another absolutely classic 80s film starring the two Coreys. This is another one like Lucas that doesn't really get mentioned too much. I don't know why. It's awesome. The Dirt Bike Kid, in my opinion, this is a pretty underrated gem of the film. It stars Peter Billingsley from A Christmas Story. This one's amazing, and this was one that I can definitely remember renting a lot as a kid. A few video stores in my area had this one available, and I used to rent this one quite a lot. It's really, really awesome. It's basically about a boy played by Peter Billingsley and his magical dirt bike. So it's definitely 80s, it's very, very 80s, pretty cheesy, but I love it. The Karate Kid, which doesn't really need an introduction, it's a classic. The Last Starfighter, which is another amazing 80s film. Flight of the Navigator, which is another one that was on my rental list quite a lot growing up. Now we're going to move on to some horror films. So for me, nostalgia definitely centers around more kid and family movies than it does actual horror films, but there's a few 80s horror films that I definitely had to mention for this particular video. Child's Play, of course, the very first horror movie I ever saw. Bad Taste by Peter Jackson. I was kind of late to the party watching this. I didn't watch it until I was slightly older, but this one definitely has a special place in my heart because I used to do film and TV studies, and this definitely played a big role in a lot of my short films back many, many years ago. And this is just a phenomenal 80s New Zealand splatter horror comedy film. Absolutely love it. The Monster Squad, not much to say. It's basically the horror equivalent of the Goonies, so that was an absolute must for this video. Children of the Corn. This definitely played a big role in me becoming a horror fan, especially during my high school years. I was addicted to the series. The Lost Boys, which is classic 80s right there. And then The Gate, which is another excellent 80s horror film. So yeah, these are just a few movies that come to mind when I think about my 80s nostalgia. Now we'll move on to some of the 90s stuff. Okay, and now we'll move on to my 90s nostalgia. So 90s is, for me, when I got more serious into movies and television. I guess I was getting slightly older, and there's a ton of phenomenal 90s films out there, especially early to mid 90s. So a few of my personal favourites are The Sandlot, which is absolutely amazing. It's a classic. I'm sure everyone out there has seen it. The greatest sports film ever made, in my opinion. The Big Green, which is pretty underrated in my opinion, and I don't know why, because it's a great soccer themed film from Walt Disney, probably the best or one of the best soccer themed films ever made, and it's got a really good cast as well, including a couple of actors from The Sandlot. The Little Giants, which is a lot of fun and again got a really good cast. The Mighty Ducks trilogy, absolutely phenomenal trilogy of movies. Heavyweights, which has a really good cast, has quite a lot of characters from the Mighty Ducks series. Great movie. War of the Buttons. This is a little underrated gem from Ireland. It's an absolutely phenomenal film about two groups of school-aged children from neighbouring villages over in Ireland, and they basically have after-school battles and cut each other's buttons off. So yeah, this one's good. I highly recommend it if you haven't checked it out. Three Ninjas, another 90s classic. This spawned a few sequels, and each one kind of went downhill, but the original is an absolute classic, and I can remember going to see this in cinema. Josh and Sam, this is a little hidden underrated gem, I think, because it's never had a official DVD release, and it's a shame because it's a really awesome 90s movie about two brothers who run away together. Really good. It's got a pretty fun and good storyline. Indian in the Cupboard, this is another one that I can remember also seeing in theatres. Free Willy movies, especially the first two. Loved those as a kid. Home Alone 1 and 2, absolutely essential 90s classics. The Cure, this one's an interesting film. It's slightly more mature themed than a lot of the other ones that I've shown within this video, but it's absolutely phenomenal. It's basically about a young boy with AIDS, and his neighbour ends up becoming friends with him. There's a lot of stigma surrounding the disease, of course, and yeah, they basically spend the summer together trying to find the cure. Really, really good, really, really sad and emotional film, but I definitely recommend it. The War, this is one of my all-time favourites. I can still remember on a hot summer weekend seeing a preview for this on a TV lifestyle show back in the 90s. Some things I can just remember like that, and I can remember renting it out that weekend and watching it multiple times, and this was a really, really popular one for me. I used to rent this out a lot. Stars Elijah Wood and Kevin Costner. Absolutely phenomenal film, basically talking about the effects of war. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this one comes highly, highly recommended. There's a lot of sort of mature themes in this one too, like poverty, race, war issues, bullying, but it's just, yeah, incredible. So check it out if you haven't. Kazam, really, really fun 90s film with Shaq. Major Pain, this one's pretty cheesy. It's set in a youth military school, but it's a lot of fun. It's really politically incorrect. There's no way this film could get made today, I don't think. But again, it's classic 90s, really good. This is another one that I consider to be pretty underrated. It's Kids of the Round Table, basically a King Arthur themed story centering around a group of kids. Again, has some interesting themes, some bullying themes, some sort of themes to do with relationships, young relationships and stuff like that, all with the backdrop storyline of King Arthur and Merlin. So this one is also really, really good. Dennis the Menace, another absolute 90s classic. And this is a gem of a British movie from the early to mid-90s, A Feast at Midnight, starring Christopher Lee. And this one is absolutely fantastic. It's set in a British boarding school, about a new student who's obsessed with cooking, and he basically recruits a lot of his classmates and roommates to form a cooking society. Really, really good. So yeah, that's just a little bit of 90s nostalgia. Now, to end the video, we're going to talk about some TV shows. Okay, so we're going to finish off the video talking about some nostalgic TV shows. So before we get into the titles that you can see in front of you, the ones that I own, there's a few cartoons that I used to watch all the time growing up, especially in the 90s. So I'll quickly go through them first. A lot of you guys, 90s kids that used to watch cartoons, are probably pretty familiar with these. We have Doug, Arthur, Hey Arnold and Rugrats. I used to watch those shows a lot. Unfortunately, I don't own any of them. I'm not really too sure how well they'd hold up for me now, but I used to love them back in the day. Anyway, a few that I own that definitely give me that nostalgic hit is Round the Twist. Now, this is an absolutely phenomenal series. It's an Australian series, and if any of you guys are familiar with the Paul Jennings books, the series, especially the first two seasons, are based on the Paul Jennings stories. It's a really fun, out there, sort of quirky series that I definitely highly recommend. So that's Round the Twist. It actually ran during the late 90s, sorry, the late 80s, early 90s, and then it took a big break and picked up again in the 2000s, I believe. So yeah, this is the complete series of that, all 52 episodes, really, really good. Erie, Indiana, which is one that I used to watch a lot on TV, so was happy that Umbrella Entertainment released the complete series on DVD. This one is really, really good. I haven't seen it in a while, but yeah, this one used to be one of my favourites. Goosebumps, I don't think there could be a 90s kid out there who is not familiar with the series in some way, shape or form, whether it be the books or the television show. I loved both. I used to read the books a lot and used to watch the television series a lot. And the TV series actually still holds up really, really well. I don't know if it's the nostalgic part of me kicking in with that, but I definitely do think this series still holds up really, really well. So I own the complete series of that. A few other shows that I wanted to mention, a couple are more modern but definitely give me that old school nostalgic feel. We have Freaks and Geeks, great series. Puberty Blues is probably one that some of you overseas viewers may not be familiar with. It's basically about teenage culture in the 70s. Really, really good series. It was a 2-season series, so I definitely highly recommend that. But probably the greatest throwback 80s themed show ever made is The Goldbergs. This show is phenomenal. If you love anything to do with the 80s movies, 80s technology, 80s references, 80s pop culture, and you've never seen The Goldbergs, you need to check it out. It's one of the greatest TV series ever made, in my opinion. So yeah, that's that in terms of television. Okay, so that was my nostalgic video response to The Last Shoegazer, or Nick. And also, I didn't mention it before, but if you're not subscribed to Nick's channel, I will be leaving a link to that in the description box below, so please check him out. Nick, I had a lot of fun doing this video. Great idea, by the way, and it's definitely something that I think everyone can relate to. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. Now, this is an open tag response, basically, so I'm not really going to tag anyone specifically, but I do want to see some of you do some video responses to this one, so yeah, feel free to do that. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if there's anything that I've shown within this video that you're not familiar with, and if you're nostalgic for the 80s and 90s, I highly encourage you to check the ones that you're not familiar with out, and also let me know what you think of the stuff that I've talked about within this video. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video and thank you for watching.